Welcome back, folks, to episode 76 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills Project podcast with me, your host, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and an adjunct professor at a local community college. And what we're going to be discussing today is mind over matter. Such a lovely title and sounds like lots of fun, and it really was, researching a little further into this. But the mind over matter has been something that many people still take as woo-woo and being somehow beyond mystical and untouchable, and only for those special circles that are willing to waste time doing. So what I'm going to do is actually kind of do a little bit of a supportive dive into what usefulness, visualization, imagination, mental rehearsal, things along these nature provides, and how it's really not a waste of time, and science has not dropped the ball on this. Now, there are quite a few studies out there that are currently being done that are phenomenally interesting, and I haven't even gotten into the real depth of this matter. I have not completely gone down that rabbit hole, but boy, when I do, I'm coming back and I'm going to tell you about it. But what I did find was rather not only fascinating but exciting, but also supportive of the fact that there are people out there that we really laud and appreciate whenever we're seeing, such as the Olympic Games that are going on right now. And what I want to say is congratulations to Portia Wycliffe, because she has just recently retired, but an amazing athlete no less. And I was very fortunate to see some of her gameplay. But people at that level, at that extreme elite athletic level that play various different sports, whether it be adversarial, such as that team sport, individual sport, whether it be contact, non-contact, and also the type of sports that involve precision and timing versus speed, contact, and evasion. And we all benefit in this area of study because one of the things as humans that we share is the fact that we are, for the most part, largely visual. Now, there are exceptions out there, and I will say that they are out there, but they're so few and far between that they're not just an extreme outlier, but they're almost unique. They're very rare. And those are going to be the folks that are prosopagnosics, and also folks that also have something that's called face blindness. And there's not so much zero visualization capacity, but their capacity to consciously be aware of it. Despite them having functioning eyes and able to remember what they've seen, and recollection is there, their conscious recollection of a visual is not something that they are able to access, but yet their visual capacity still works. So there's a disconnect in a sense, not unlike synesthetes, wherever there is a confusion of signals supposedly. And this is what the medical science says, but still outliers. People out there that are perceiving slightly different than what you do, but yet they're still able to function in a world. So these are some important points to keep in mind, but I'm going to dive into what it is that I did find that I thought was rather fascinating. One was that there's still quite a few studies out there that are being done in the use of visualization, imagination, and also what it is that we call mental rehearsal. And what I want to touch upon first are what science has found to be a very distinct difference in types of visualization that one experiences when one is intending to visualize, assuming we are all within that center, that bell curve, once again, the largest percentage of our population affected. And that is, there are three different types. One is that we have what's called an internal visualization, and this is what we actually can generate based on what we've experienced and are recalling from what we've seen, like the lemon that I've talked about in the past in this podcast. Wherever you think about a lemon, biting a lemon, or even seeing or experiencing something like seeing somebody eating something sour, even smelling something citric once it's being bitten in front of you, or just having a recollection of that, either one will cause you to salivate. And this is called the cephalic phase of eating when it has to do with eating, but we are very well aware that the cephalic part is visually oriented because it's a recollection. Now, once again, I said internal visualization. Internal visualization, that term basically means that anything that we generate by memory or recollection is considered internal. So that's the internal visualization that we're talking about there. And Internal visualization can also be a recollection that we develop into what's called a constructed memory or a constructed thought, wherever we see a baby. I've seen babies before, and they're really cute, and they make us feel all warm and fuzzy. Then you think about a big, bushy black beard that you've seen on somebody from anywhere in the world, and then you realize those are two memories that you've seen out in your world, two actual experiences that we have recollection of. But when we do a constructed memory, and we'll call it a memory because it'll be an after the fact at some point, then we put that beard on that little baby, or put it on the face of the cutest puppy, or maybe even your own dog that's really silly that you like to play with. Wow, what a picture, right? Makes you either smile or go like, wow, what the heck's that? But might even give you a few chuckles at that moment. But the actual construction of a memory based on two things, of something that did not exist or does not exist, is something that is also an internal memory. So we can actually make things happen such that we'll even have laughter occur. And laughter is a reflex, mind you. It is not something that we think to do. It kind of occurs. And the studies were done to support that idea numbers of years back, where they're actually realizing that disgust along with laughter is something that is a deeply wired thing within our brain, which is really cool to know. So when somebody laughs, sometimes as a stress response, it's not because things are ha-ha funny. One of my sons actually does that whenever things get stressful. His stress reaction is smile and laughter. Whenever I've had to dad him, I've had to tell him, turn around, son. I couldn't look at him when he was doing it because he was so compelling that he'd make me laugh in the process of trying to be authoritative and tell him what to do, what not to do, and teach the lesson, so to speak. So that was an interesting experience. Now back to visualization. The other type of visualization was external visualization, those things that we actually take in from our outer world and what we're actually seeing at that moment in our outer world. So what am I visualizing or perceiving more correctly that I can say that I'm seeing, like my bookshelf that I'm looking at across my living room right now, and also my laptop where I'm working and doing this podcast, and those things that I can objectify, name, and label. That's a higher cortical process, would be considered external visualization. Now, the next one is called a kinesthetic visualization. And it's actually kinesthetic imagery is the way that the term was given, but there is a visualization quality to it. But the imagery that we pull up is more like from the sports psychology side, but also applied in medical, and I'll explain that here in a bit. But the kinesthetic one is probably a little more difficult in that whenever you're doing a recollection of a certain image of movement, let's say you've seen somebody performing a movement that you're trying to learn, like Nadia Comaneci doing a perfect 10 at the Olympics first time in the 1970s, or maybe the pirouette that is done in a dance class, or maybe a simple punch or a spinning kick that is done in the martial arts, or maybe seeing yourself actually landing a dart on target in perfect red center, or even golfing, wherever you're putting the ball and seeing it go 18 feet and falling in the hole, this sort of thing, where we've seen it before. We want to emulate that, but whenever we are doing this, we're kind of doing what's called something along the lines of mental rehearsal with a physical rehearsal along with it, where you may actually be doing the action gently, but not doing it, but imagining doing it, and all the muscles involved, and maybe even having your golf club involved, and maybe the ball, and kind of seeing it as you're doing it, seeing it as you're doing it, even though it may not be for high stakes or an actual game, but before. So in other words, you're seeing what it is you're doing as you're doing it. But you can also do this wherever you're seated and doing kinesthetic recall of what the memory of the muscles feel like firing and moving and holding tools and going through the motion itself. There is another term for that comes out of the neuro-linguistic program inside this called visual image streaming, where you could actually see yourself doing the motion, and you go through the motion with your eyes closed, and you're imagining the green, you're imagining maybe even the tops of your shoes if you're golfing, or wherever you're interacting with an opponent, if you're in an adversarial type sport, wherever it's not only team or individual, but where there is someone else that is opposing you, an opponent, this sort of thing, or a counterpart. And you imagine all those things, but you're focusing on the skill under the duress of that imagined pressure, so to speak, or their imagined game or state that you're going to be experiencing while you're doing the same thing with swimming, diving, basketball. Now, I've tested this with a number of folks. Most of those folks were children in many cases that would be at family gatherings. And I don't drink or smoke, do anything like that. So while the adults were doing that, I would usually do things like maybe we'd be shooting baskets and I'd be teaching techniques. Well, imagine this. Imagine that in the sense, and then they would follow along. We would do the technique. And even though they were successful at doing it before, by adding the visualization aspect, like the term that I would use from the martial arts is putting the chi in the whole. Chi is the internal energy that is a psycho-spiritual energy that supposedly exists according to traditional Chinese medical. And I do have an advanced degree in education. It doesn't make me a fool for believing this, but it's something that I did not believe until after the fact, after I had an experience. I did not believe before, but after that, it's like, well, there's something there. But the idea came from a non-belief perspective. And what I was thinking is, if I imagine that energy or mindset, or even put my mind into something, that tends to be a little abstract to me. But whenever I said put the chi in the hole, we were actually shooting baskets, and I just imagined my point being in the very center of that basket, and even without necessarily aiming per se, but just throwing the ball in the direction with the intention of getting into that little hole. The very center of that basket, I was able to make it. So I tested it with myself, tested it with others, and it seemed to be a very useful technique. And it's more so not anything woo-woo, but probably just the fact that we're predictive and then we have expectations of based on what it is that we intend. So I'm just kind of giving you a really important technique there. 3 little pieces that can make your methods better, and you can actually flex it and bend it as you need. And I've used it for archery and also target shooting. But when we would do target shooting, we would use something that was very low powered, like an airsoft pistol. And I would put up a piece of paper, and I would make a mock-up of a target, this sort of thing. And without using necessarily hard line, keep your eye on the ball, hard focus, but rather a soft focus visual, and telling people to intend what it is that they wanted to touch with the pellet. They were able to hit it 90% of the time. And this was all very anecdotal and very, off the cuff type of stuff, but it was very effective for teaching people very quickly in a very spontaneous setting how to be not only a good targeter, but also being really good at intention and also completion of intention. So there were some things that came of that. But once again, the kinesthetic imagery is one where we start pulling up physical sensations, or try to remember the physical, or maybe even going through the motion itself, which does fire the actual muscles. Even if your eyes are closed and you're imagining going through the motion without a golf club, but going through the swing, this sort of thing, or going through it with the golf club itself, but yet imagining the ball and seeing it fly after you've hit it, this sort of thing. So why are these things important is my question. Well, one is, considering the fact that science is still pursuing this, they're still trying to find out, well, how does the mind affect healing? The mind-body connection, we know it's there. We used to think there was a mind-body separation. This is what's called Descartes' error, where it's the ghost in the machine somehow housed in this body, this avatar of sorts, but it's not connected somehow. But yet it still lives in there and provides consciousness. And we've since made the connection, realizing that everything from the brainstem down is considered our subconscious mind, as much as that part of our mind we can't consciously access. So our body is an extension of that subconscious mind in a sense. And much of what we've realized is that if we want to change our mind, we have to change our body, because it's our body that drives. And often because it drives, we tend to get into these arguments. And I love Robert Sapolsky when he talks about all of his things. But if you get so granular to the point that we think that we really have no free will, then we can't really choose, even though there's choice in the matter. And that starts speaking more about sentience of mind and where does mind exist versus the fact that our brain, it does fire, it does what it does. But yet we still can't put our finger on mind, only where areas fire as we remember emotions. And even those are byproducts of having a brain or having an experience with the brain. So back out of this without getting too granular once again, because if we get too granular, then the tools become less useful because we get bogged down in the details, not realizing that we're describing those things and we're supposed to take an understanding of those things from science and not get bogged down in the details. Well, for instance, with fat loss, whenever we go so far, then we have gluconeogenesis. We don't want to do that. That's not true. We have to do that. That's how our body does. Whenever we wake up fasted, our blood sugar may go through what's called the dawn phenomenon. We may be just a slight bit higher, even though we haven't eaten for 10, maybe 12 hours. It doesn't mean you have elevated blood sugar chronically in the sense wherever you're diabetic type 2. But what it does mean is that you probably worked out a lot and you probably used all your stores in your body in the morning. Releasing cortisol decides to go into we need to forage and have energy to find food mode. Not because we have refrigerators now, which is much too efficient, and then we eat and then our blood sugar will go up again. Sometimes it'll actually go down after having eaten. And that is part of that dawn phenomenon that occurs. So what does visualization have to do with that? Often, whenever we start thinking of our hunger, what our body feels, then we start ideating, having ideas of, more correctly, how to find food. Where is food? This sort of thing. And visualization, the cephalic phase of eating, is involved in that. So that's an internal visualization based on a very kinesthetic drive, a very deep visceral drive. So let's get into some of the science of how they're finding out what visualization does, because this is incredibly interesting, but also one that's validating of what visualization is, and that it's not some waste of time. Often there are those of us that think that, oh, I'm so intellectual, so smart, and yes, I'm making fun and deriding a bit, but I'm doing so with love, mind you, and that I'm beyond this and I shouldn't have to do this. I should just think my way through. Well, it turns out that even if you're highly intellectual, there are still people out there that, regardless how intellectual they are, they do not drop the ball on the side of visualization. We can still have that capacity. And whenever you can visualize well, those that tend to be a little more artistic and see more detail in the visual, they tend to do a little better with it. So just some details to pay attention to, but some of the details that are helpful in making visualization a useful thing is how vivid the visualization. And this actually is one of the drivers away of people that would even try visualization. Oh, I can't imagine. Everything looks dull and I can't see it. And it's supposed to kind of look dull. Not everyone has like a Disney quality experience whenever they're visualizing. And the very small range, these are outliers, like those that are prosopagnosia that fall on the farthest end of no. The ones that fall in the highest end of yes tend to be just that. They tend to be outliers as well. Most of us tend to have kind of holographic, almost dark, flat-ish images, and some of us, when we dream, have very vivid dreams. So you know that that's not always the case when we dream and when we daydream. So one of the things that drives people away from even trying visualization is that, well, it's not all pretty. It's not like a Disney quality movie, and that's not your fault. That is your nature. And it's okay. It all gets worked out in our subconscious mind. Sometimes it requires that we have a script to follow along, and that's okay. That's why creative visualizations have taken on such a great following on YouTube and anywhere you can download, because if you're following the instruction, we can actually, by listening to those words, construct those things. Once again, the constructed memory, the baby with the beard type of thing. We can make it happen. Some of us are really good at following instruction that way, and that's okay. It doesn't make you a weak visualizer. It just means that sometimes we have to gain a little skill. Practice is important. As far as visual imaging, one of the things that they used was a Likert scale, 1 through 5. 1 is, very, very vivid, and 1 was, not vivid at all. Probably where you've seen the use of a Likert scale would be wherever we use what's called the subjective units of distress or disturbance scale, wherever if you go to the hospital and they're trying to get somebody to rate their level of pain from 0 to 10, 10 being the worst with a little frowny face guy crying, that's on the chart for somebody that may not be particularly verbal or capable of speaking the same language. It's very similar in that sense. Now, one of the things, too, we realize is that whenever using visualization, one of the more important things to learn a skill is to see somebody else doing it, and then we try to emulate. One of the other useful ways of doing this is seeing oneself doing this, and this is where using a mirror is very helpful. This is where mirrors become very useful whenever physical therapy and things along that line tend to be used. the method of using mirrors is not anything new to our athletic performances, and I mentioned dance and ballet earlier. And if you go to any ballet studio, at least the higher end studios, most of them have the railings along the wall next to the mirror so people can actually see what they're doing, where they're stretching, and also so they can see the amplitude, how big these motions are, and also the virtuosity that is used in gymnastics too, so they can see the depth, the length, and also how far and how true they are to the technique as it should be performed at its peak. And the visualization aspect is not just seeing it, and that's external visualization, mind you, because it's happening in real time at that moment, but also we recollect based on external visualization, and our memories help us stretch and do things whenever we no longer have that mirror present. Martial arts schools tends to do this. Boxing schools always tend to have a good mirror, and that's kind of an elevation of what used to be shadow boxing. Shadow boxing being one of the first external visualization tools, wherever one used visualization projected, so to speak, from light behind the shadow, or even from light reflected the mirror, or even for that matter, the oldest mirror, that would be a pond of water bottle or even a bowl of water, where we could see things occurring and gain imagery from said tool. In 2022, there were some studies being done that were focusing on kinesthetic visual imagery, and they were using actually a projected screen where somebody was in a wheelchair, for instance, and they were seeing what they were wanting them to do in physical therapy, and that's regain the ability to walk. And by watching the visual image of someone else walking, the closest thing to first person, where they're seeing the back of the individual walking away. So that would be essentially watching someone else, or as if they were watching themselves walk, so to speak. But that was a close approximation to be able to emulate. And these visualization trainings that they use, actually, they were using fMRI technology to measure. And they realized that the motor cortical areas in the brain were actually firing. The body was firing more. And yes, they were learning how to walk and relearning, and there were many that did actually regain the skill. And one of the things that were confound had to do with chronic pain that tended to actually prevent the person from doing, because it wasn't so much not wanting to, but rather sometimes pain's an indicator of injury and not to do things, and those were some of the confounds there. But they were actually using that, and there were some that actually did improve their ability to walk and regain walking capacity after having had a stroke and having to relearn how to refire those areas after the ischemic damage. And there was also another study in which they were trying to use visual imagery to help people overcome physical pain and to encourage motion. One thing that they did found is that the internal visual imagery was something that did not necessarily drop a whole lot of pain, so the analgesic effect wasn't nearly as high as what they were hoping, at least to find. But they did find that motion did improve and increase in some. But once again, the confound was how much pain was involved that would actually limit the person's motivation to want to do, which sounds a lot like learned helplessness, if anything. But it's something that if it's been chronic enough, long enough, the body responds and says, I'm not going to do that, and it overrides, but it just doesn't speak it that way. It just doesn't fire. Now, one of the things in visualization as well is if we're in the first person and we're seeing ourselves, our hands, for instance, in a dream where we wake up and do something along the lines of a more conscious dream, then this is where lucid dreaming, more correctly, this is something wherever we're very associated in. And sometimes a visualization, if we're associated in, I see myself doing, like Mario Kart, I'm seeing my hands on the driver's wheel. I look down, I see the tops of my shoes, but I'm not looking at my face. That means I'm seeing my experience like I would experience it in my body. And this is more the avatar experience. And we're going to use that term like the movie, The Blue Guys with the Tails. That's kind of cool. And whenever you see yourself from the inside, you realize your consciousness is not unlike Descartes' ever, the ghost in the machine, so to speak, but the ghost has the handles on the controls. So you actually are not disembodied, but rather involved. And this avatar experience is something that kind of helps give us a sense of depth in what it is we call our visualization. And we have that sense of not only control, but involvement. But just an idea to keep in mind. Now, whenever you see something third person, we tend to emulate things a little better. But one of the things about visualization and healing and body-mind healing that is really fascinating, there are many anecdotes about this. There were some studies done that they actually did in China on Tai Chi. And Tai Chi is something that I've trained for many years. I learned it as a martial art and as a healing art. But what is really cool is that there were times that people recognize that just by watching somebody, an exponent, a very highly skilled Tai Chi person, doing Tai Chi, going through motion, whenever someone was bedridden and unable to physically move because of an orthopedic physical injury, the people that were injured and healed, that were observing and watching the Tai Chi practitioner, actually healed and regained ability to walk, to move again in orthopedic injuries that otherwise would have been considered either too far gone or maybe limiting after the fact, of where people would not move as well as these people had recovered to. So there is something to the body-mind connection, and it's not just our own body-mind, but also our body-mind connection to external visualization and seeing motion in others, and the emulation of that. Is that a social construct? Is that something that is driven by us wanting to be part of that group? And what if that group is just one other person just wanting to be able to do what they do? And it's not a jealousy thing, but rather wanting for oneself what's best. And I think that's a survival trait. That is just merely a kind of a loose thought that I want to throw out there, something I'm probably going to follow up on a little more, and something definitely worth discussing with people you may know out there, and ask people, what do you think about that? What do you think about people that heal by using their mind, or watching someone else that is healthy and moving and accelerating healing in the self? Absolutely fascinating, to say the least. But among other things, lots of potential there, and science hasn't let go of this, and it's not as woo-woo as people would have you think out in the colloquium. If people say that, just know that they're speaking from their own ignorance, and this isn't being rude, but rather their lack of knowledge. It's agnosia. It's not ignorant in the bad sense, but rather ignorant in the sense of lack of knowledge, truly agnostic. And sometimes we just have to be a little patient and understand that. So, with that, I'm going to close for today, and I really enjoyed this morning, Sunday morning, speaking to y'all, taking a little time off from work just to chill and hang out. And this is something that came to mind that was very fun for me to research, and I'm going to continue doing that. And if you want to find this podcast, of course, you can find it on all platforms. That's iTunes. That is also Amazon Music and Spotify. And I do have a bit of a following, a smallish following on YouTube as well. And I'm going to continue to expand this channel. So for now, I want to tell you, if you have anything to give as far as feedback, please send it to the email at runningmangetskillsproject@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And if you know somebody that could benefit from this, please share it with them. I'd love to hear from them as well. And even if they don't want to hear it, give it to them anyway. I think they will learn, they'll appreciate it, and they'll be a lot smarter as a result. So you take care, keep your mind on things mindfully, visualize, physically rehearse, daydream, of course, and walk well.